Today, we're going to talk about unconventional Black teaching in tough times on Freedom Friday.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
Welcome, friends. It's another Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif El-Mekki and me. Sharif, how you doing, brother?
It's good, man. Good to see you. Glad to be back. Glad we're having this conversation, this public, very necessary conversation that happens on Freedom Friday. Good to see you.
It's always good to see you because it's always a learning opportunity. We kind of actually learn off of each other for the last last several years. It's been that way.
It's been
on this particular topic. You're the expert, though. So when it comes to Black teaching in the modern times and how we can think, more unconventionally about the purpose and the use of a Black teacher, a Black educator beyond the classroom, right? When we talk about teaching, oftentimes we're in our mind just talking about someone standing in front of a classroom and delivering, instruction or whatever. And first of all, that's a problematic way of seeing it. Even when we're talking about teaching in schools, it should be more than that. But in the history and the tradition of Black education, the Black educator has always had an enhanced role beyond just classroom teaching. Black educators have been democracy teachers, have been community members who lead the community on the education front by letting parents know what schools need, what their children need, how to be political, how to engage in the act of securing freedom through democratic systems. That's always been part of the Black educator portfolio of responsibilities that go beyond what maybe other teachers in other communities do when they see the job as a profession, not as a calling. So anyways, I have an article that I sent to you that kind of gets us there. But before I jump into that, I want to just check in with you on this because you have been, let's just start it this way. You have been traveling the country for a long time now, but definitely this year you had a pretty booked schedule. Everywhere you go, you have to talk about Black teaching because your organization is trying to build up the Black teacher pipeline.
right.
And knowing you as long as I have, I feel like I know a lot about what it is that you see, what you're learning, whatever, but I don't always know what you're seeing and learning. Has anything about your thinking on the role of the Black educator and Black teaching, has any of it changed as you've been traveling so much and having to have the conversation over and over and over again with different communities? What have you learned, and has anything changed?
Yeah, you know what? What's changed the most, Chris, is my understanding that there's the absolute need for it. Like that we have to literally triple down on not only rebuilding this Black teacher pipeline, but protecting it, securing it. Where before it was this is very important, but now it's absolutely critical. When you look at the impact that Black teachers have, the oblivious nature that so many of their colleagues and supervisors who do not identify as Black have about the Black experience in their schools and in their school systems. How many people, I've been blown away of how many people are interested in recruiting teachers, Black teachers, and have not given a second's thought about what it would take to actually retain them. And to paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King, in their burning schoolhouses or their burning school districts. Just I think the third piece that has really blown me away is this idea that, we're only going to engage high school youth in this career pathway. We're not going to engage them. Matter of fact, we're going to just assume that because you're a student, if you're interested in teaching, it'll just organically happen, and we'll wait till you graduate college and come knocking on the door and say, "Hey, I'm back. I want to teach." But we will ignore you the entire time before then. Where that doesn't really happen with other professions. Even, you look at baseball, they got a farm system. Football, they have the college system, right? There's always this youth engagement in this future career pathway. But teaching, for some reason, just because you're a student, they assume that, you know what, you'll eventually come. So there are very few like teacher academies that are designed specifically to expose students to what does it actually mean to have the mindset, the skill, and the will necessary to be an effective leader of a classroom. So those are like the big takeaways that I've seen over the years of just like, you know what, this is absolutely it's crazy for one.
Hmm. Hmm.
And two, we have to like really double down and create a different way to look at it.
I think more than anything, we always have to keep focusing the attention where we want focus because there's not enough people thinking every day about Black education for one, Black teaching for two, and what we're talking about today, this enhanced role for Black teachers. So let's get into it and talk about it. There was this article that is in the 19th right now called "The Mainstream Education Often," or I'm sorry, Mainstream Education Often Neglects Black History. TikTok, Freedom Schools, and other resources are bridging the gap. This article is by Candace Norwood in the 19th, I'm sorry, which is a publication that I encourage you all to follow. They have some really good things that are going on in that. In today's Freedom Friday, we really want to talk about a significant movement unfolding on social media. And this new article by Candace Norwood in the 19th talks a little bit about the possibility that our communities can take education into our own hands. Norwood introduces us to 22-year-old Cameron Davis, a social media influencer who's leading the charge on TikTok, sharing daily videos that dive into lesser-known Black history facts. Her initiative is not just about filling knowledge gaps, but also about celebrating the positive contributions from the Black community that are often overlooked by mainstream curricula. And in the shadow of a growing movement to limit teaching about race and racism, with over 500 restrictive measures introduced since September of 22, or I'm sorry, let me get that right, of September 2020, the struggle for inclusive Black education persists, reflecting on past challenges like the post 1954 resistance to desegregation after the Supreme Court's case, Brown versus Board of Education. After their ruling, Black communities had to push for new ways of gaining knowledge. One of those ways was the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer, where there was a lot of kind of outbreak of us teaching our own and developing camps and developing freedom schools, establishing the Black Studies Department in 1968. I don't think people know how big a deal that was and how relatively recent it was that we even had a Black Studies Department in higher ed. Where we were, before this time, were virtually invisible. I think what's so important about this now as a movement or something to talk about is that we've exhausted a little bit of what we can do in schools only as our main kind of, our main strategy for educating our children and doing education. It's time for some additional or supplemental ways of using the tools that we have at our disposal, the people that we have at our disposal, and the non-traditional, non-schooling environment ways that we can educate our kids beyond just classrooms. So what do you think about this article? First of all, let's start there. I think you're on mute there, Sharif. Well, you might not be on mute. Did your mic go out? Did you pay the bill? Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can hear you now. Sorry about that. Oh, now it looks like a little bit. I can hear you just a little bit, and you might be freezing. So while you get that worked out, I'll keep going forward on this article that the 19th put out that I think is very good, and I encourage everybody to read it. What is very important to me specifically is we do a lot of thinking about the power of social media. We at when I say we, the organization that I lead, Bright Beam and Education Post, we think a lot about how we get more voices into the education debate that come from civilian territory. How can we get more people, everyday people, involved in the discussion and in the debate, so it's not just being had by other people about us. The power of social media, the power of the kind of new media vehicles that we have offer a democratization of how we approach this work. You don't have to be a classroom teacher to teach children. You don't have to be, a district paid employee to have a real strong role in educating our children. As we talked about, there are now TikTok influencers that if you follow them, I can guarantee you that, and I can point out to you that if you followed them for a week, you would know more about history in that week. You would learn more about our history in that week than you probably would if you were sitting in a traditional educational environment like an elementary school. The way that I know this to be true is that I follow a few history influencers on TikTok who make it their daily job to put out high quality videos about Black education. And when I test my own kids about, like, what did you learn this week in history and, just in general, it's real. I'm dissatisfied. I'm dissatisfied with the level of knowledge that they have and what they're learning. For instance, when I ask all three, I have three kids in schools right now. When I ask all three of them, what did you learn this week in history class?
Mhm.
They all three have gone through the same pattern. And they say they say it in a very kind of like curt way that where they're not very impressed. They say all we cover is the same thing. We do Minnesota history, we do the history of the Mississippi River, and then wars. And and I'm like, what do you mean wars? And they're just like War One, War Two, War Three. That's the extent of our history, whatnot. And then
Mhm.
I start, just asking them about like
That's hilarious.
historic figures and other things. They're like, yeah, no, we don't cover that.
Yeah.
Anyways, the power of social media, I think, is really important for us to use as a vehicle to
Mhm.
teach in any way we can. So you're back, Sharif.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Actually,
I'm not sure what was happening, but hopefully it serves us well for the rest of this time. But yeah, you asked about the article. One, I love, one, thank you. You're always like you always say, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a teacher. I'm like, this is teaching. You impart knowledge and information for people to get for continue their education, right? Like not the schooling sense, the education, and not the training, but the learning. And this is one example. Not only was the article fantastic, and I really hope folks dive into it and would love to continue this engagement about the article online. But I hadn't heard of the 19th, right? Which is another
Mhm.
resource. Like I had never heard of them. I'm just like, oh, this is not only my following, but I'm going to disseminate this and share with my team and family and stuff. Like, hey, this is another learning opportunity. But you know what? I love when, we talk about this a lot, Chris. Like, the more we can help people connect the dots between what was done so they don't think that this form of oppression and erasure that we're seeing across all these states. When you showed us that list in like Wisconsin that they were trying to pass of all the words that they say, you can't say this word, like this, the utter ridiculousness of it. We have to recognize sometimes we start, going into despair and just throwing our hands up and just like, oh my gosh, we have to recognize like no sad singing, no
Mhm.
hand wringing, just absolute determination, not only about the righteousness of our struggle, but that we've had so many like models to learn from, and we can't apply all of their lessons. It's their life, right? Like Angela Davis always says, like, hey, listen, we did what we did with what we could. You have to take what you can, but you need new tools in your bag, and the technology, the access, the internet, these are all things that I think are tools that that she didn't speak to specifically, but I think that's the realm that she means. And yeah, I follow several teachers, educators online. Like Mr. Krim is one of them. Mr. Krim is
Mhm.
consistently, you know, pumping out information that is just like, yo, this is, and I share with my children and other people's children, just like, hey, this is something, yeah, like the pranks and all that, like cute, like, but also make sure you're making that you're making time, because I say you some stuff that I think is just hilarious, right? But like there's also some things that can actually make us smarter, make us better, make us more well informed, and as community. Like this is such critical stuff. Mr. Krim Kwame always has great stuff that more people
Mhm.
should be following and learning. Like they actually teach. When I get online, I'm just like actually usually sharing an article, or I may say something, but like they're actually teaching. They're taking these lessons, these complex issues, and they're chunking them down and then delivering them. I think this is a classroom.
This is a step forward in expanding your classroom. So Mr.
Yes.
Krim is a Chicago teacher who, has had experience in teaching in the classroom. But when he gets to his TikTok channel, he's able to really teach what he really wants to teach. And if you were to follow him for any amount of time, you can follow him either on through EdPost or, just on his own TikTok channel. Look at the number of followers he has. I mean, he's got 9.3 million likes. That's people liking his content, and almost 400,000 people following him. And he is a Black history teacher and speaker, and that's what all of his content is about. I can guarantee you, if you're a teacher that follows him and you're looking for ideas about things that you can teach that are chunked down, like you said, chunked down into a bite-sized shareable format, this would be one of the guys that you would want to follow, because he's really good at it. And earlier we talked a little bit about um, um, this influencer. She calls it commentary. So Cameron is the influencer that was talked about, 22 years old, talked about in that 19th article, who also teaches. If you were to follow her, she got really tired of the content, the history content that she saw out in the world and the curriculum, and where it was falling short. And she, during Black History Month, started doing a video a day on people that we had never heard of, because she was tired. We've talked about this before, of every February being the same group of people. So she has this platform now, and here's the beauty of this that I love so much. Everybody's got something to say. We all have a piece of the puzzle. We all have learned some things that if we were to share it with each other, we would be making each other smarter. And this kind of communal digital learning kind of platform, way of thinking about how we educate ourselves is really, I think, underused. And we should be thinking more of it as like kind of like a school without walls. Like
Yeah.
in a choose your own adventure school. You don't have to follow the same influencers that I do, but you should, because I think, I think they're all amazing. But Sharif, what do you think about the intergenerational part of this? Because I think, definitely somebody listening to this could say right away to themselves, I ain't getting involved in all that TikTok. That's for the children.
Hey, that sound like me a year or so ago. Like,
I'm not
don't mock
getting
me,
on the
bro. Don't
ticketed
mock me.
practice.
Listen. This I get that. I get that. And a young man told me this summer. He said, you know what? I often hear. He was talking about his own family. He's like, I often hear that, my elders say that they want to have strong relationships, but it's always, with us. And he's like, it's him and his cousins. Met him in Michigan this summer, and really young man. And what he said like really struck me. And I heard it before, but he said it in such a different way. And he was talking about his own family. Often when I heard it, it was about like activism and the different, sometimes unfortunate miscommunication between generations of activists. He was talking about his own family, and he said his grandmother had his grandparents had many grandchildren, and they often talked about wanting to build relationships. And he said, I honor them and I respect them. He said, but why is it that you all elders always only want to build relationships on your own terms? And it really got me to thinking differently, even about, my own children, and just like, am I coming into their space and their world enough? You know how they say sometimes when you really want to connect with a kid, don't stand over them and you're like, 6 feet tall and they're, 2 feet. Sometimes go on your hands and come down into their world, and be able to engage and listen to them eye to eye, And so he made me think about like, how can we do that more in other spaces, not just in person, where we're like, okay, let me shrink myself a little bit so that they're not always just looking up to me. How can we do that in a digital space? And where are they? And where do they communicate? And where do they engage? And he talked about like their relationship with their grandparent changed once she, just started looking at other things. He was like, she has no idea what we think is funny,
Mm,
for example. You know what I mean? Like what we think, what we exchange between cousins.
mhm,
And he's
mhm.
like, I'm not talking about like, disrespectful stuff or things that we were just like, oh, I don't know if you should, he was just like, no, just clean, pure humor, interest. He's like, they don't know. The other generation doesn't know. They feel like they own the relationship and you have to go through their door all the time. He said, just sometimes it would be amazing if they came through the door to come see where we are and who we are. And I think that, how you described it is just a perfect example of that. Like, being on, so my daughter will send me things that she's like, you know what, I think this would interest you. And she does it through TikTok. And I always tell her, like, I don't have TikTok. Stop sending me TikTok. So that was like it's like a joke because they know I have. I'm not on it a lot, but they know I have it. They're like, I know you can see this. But yeah, and Instagram. I told you a few years ago, my students got me on Instagram.
Mhm, mhm.
So come at dismissal at Shoemaker one day, they were sharing something. They're like, oh, Mackie, well, how come you're never, we can't follow you with it. I was like, they were like, you talk about this kind of stuff. We see it in the paper, but blah, blah. How about on here? We would love to learn more. And I was like, I don't even know how to get there. Like, what do you know? So they took my phone, put it on, and I've been using it ever since. Like, it's just an additional way to communicate. It's almost like a language.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know how they say, if you're bilingual, it means you speak two languages. Trilingual, three languages. If you speak one language, you're an American, right? And so it's kind of similar to that. Like being able to, I tell people, if you can speak more than one language, that means those are millions more people you can communicate with.
Mhm.
So we
And you
speak a
should
little.
wanna do that. You
You
should
should want to
wanna
do that,
communicate with
right?
more people. Yeah.
So this is another way to communicate with more people, particularly if it's something that can help our community, bridge gaps, learn more, keep the curiosity going. So it's another way to communicate.
Yeah, I think for our audience, we should do a little bit to say what we think or define what we think is unconventional Black teaching.
Mhm.
And I don't have a perfect answer for that, but that is what our topic is today. And I would say, first of all, we know what we think we know, or we mostly know what conventional Black teaching would be, and that would be, conventional Black teaching would be professional educators who are working for certified systems that have kind of public backing and state backing. So that's mostly in districts and in schools and in classrooms, and that would be conventional Black teaching. One of the things that conventional teaching overall, whether it's conventional Black teaching or conventional teaching just in general, is falling short of is catching up Black children not to this year's test scores, but to history's kind of gap. So you have a portion of America that had a 400-year head start on everything that we talk about. And since that has been the problem, the goal has always been to make Black people whole and to make black people whole in the society that did not start out considering them whole. So they lost many years of growth and opportunity, and that is the part that's responsible for the gaps that we see today, in my mind, in my
Mhm.
opinion. So if I were an unconventional Black teacher, I wouldn't see it as my goal of just delivering today's content this week and next week and for the next 6 months. That wouldn't close the bigger gap over the long period of time. It's going to require some additional teaching, and it's going to require more than just a teacher doing it. We all have to be teachers. We have to be
Mhm.
communal people, share information. You and I share a ton of information back and forth with each other. And to me, it's every bit as valuable as anything I've ever learned in school, right?
Mhm.
Like, matter of fact, probably more valuable, one, because I enjoy it and I didn't enjoy school, as the first
No, I
part.
feel you. Yeah, yeah.
And two, it's mostly because it's relevant to me. I care more about it because you and I share kind of ideas about history and whatever. So unconventional Black teaching for me would be above and beyond what conventional teaching does, with an eye and a focus on closing the historic gap, with the eye and the focus on arming Black children intellectually, spiritually, economically, and politically to actually be the leaders that we know God created them to be. That would be unconventional Black teaching to me. And that would require you, if that's what unconventional teaching is, that would require you to ask some questions like, through what forum will I teach? Through what platform will I teach? What tools do I have that I can use to do this new thing that I want to do? I can just give you some tools. Social media is one way of teaching, and we just showed you like a couple of Black educators who are online on TikTok with hundreds of thousands of followers who are teaching every day through that medium. But that's not everybody's thing. In person, outside of school, educators can do things with their community that, are like one and done's, like, hey, tonight we're going to talk about X. Let's fill it in person. A lot of people like more in-person stuff than, the social media things that we do. There are forms of schooling that we don't talk enough about that are at our disposal. And I've had to do a lot of thinking about this recently because I have broken with what the so-called school choice movement. I don't consider myself to be a part of the mainstream corporate school choice movement that is kind of culturally free, quality blind, accountability free thing that they're doing. But I still see the premise of multiple pathways for our learners to learn being important to us. So we should be able to start our own schools. We should be able to build the institutions that are going to train the Black mind. You could do that through micro schools. You could do it through homeschooling. You could do it through charter schools. You could do it through magnet schools. You could do it through public or private, independent schools. Black people have done all of those things. So those are the tools that my premise for unconventional Black teaching is just that. Above and beyond what conventional teaching does, with the focus on freeing children and closing the historic gap that keeps them behind constantly, through tools like social media or in-person meetings, different forums and venues. And if you are going to do a school, maybe there are different ways that you could do schools. So that's my definition. What do you think, Sharif? If you had to answer to what you think unconventional Black teaching would be, how would you frame it?
Yeah, no, I love all of that. I would definitely take all of that and include in my definition. I think I would add, as you mentioned, like we're all teachers in some space, and I would really push into formalize that in our communities, right? Like you figure in the freedom school tradition is part of your responsibility as an adult, as a citizen, as a contributor, as a community member is to train and develop your replacements. And so that means no matter where you are in the community, you know, uh, who are you developing to take your work? Because you're not going to continue your work forever. So who's going to do that moving forward, no matter what it is, right? And so I wish we could get back to this idea of like an apprenticeship, model, like where back in the day, everybody had an apprentice. The drummer had an apprentice because one day arthritis was going to take over. They ain't going to be able to beat that drum as like they used to be. The artist had an apprentice and showing them, hey, here's how I did this. And you're going to take these skills and you're going to learn and you're going to develop it even further, right? Like the linguist had apprentices, like everybody, just and we talk about mentorship all the time, right? Like it can be a form of that where not just like browbeating and tell them, oh, I used to do that, but actually like, hey, here's some skills and I'm going to impart, like finding who's the right person, because often people are like, students looking for teachers, but sometimes the teacher, that person with the knowledge is actually looking for someone to hand it off to. And I think we have that, but we got to encourage and formalize it in some ways for that to really, continue. And I agree with you with there's a sister that has it's called Liberated Minds, and it's the homeschool university, HUE university, right? Like is for young Black youth, and I love like the work that Liberated Minds does and how they share information, for families, because it's just like, hey, you can come to the school, kind of their formal thing, or you can just take this and use it in however you want, to continue to do that. And then I would say the other pieces, and you mentioned this as well, connecting the dots. Dr. Carr often talks about, they call them griots, and West African, they will hold the story and the culture and be able to pass them on, for that. But he said, like, that's a French term, griot, I think. He said jolly is the actual, like, Mandinka or Hausa term, and that means blood. And when he described that, that just struck me. So it's not like, there are a lot of time people are like, oh, they're the storytellers, they're the griots, it's like, no, the actual word in this West African language that it is derived from means blood. Like, the actual blood of the people is contained in this role. Like, they are, and you think of the blood to a body, like that, we can't survive without understanding the history of our people, the connections between our people. And that is a big part that I think is missing, that should be included in this non-traditional way. And then the last one, literacy. Like, we talk about all the time, Chris, like, how Cuba decided, oh, we're going to be a literate country, and we are going to make sure everybody is a part of the literacy army. Everyone is going to know how to teach someone else how to read, the fundamentals of reading. We can do that. Like, that is something that we can absolutely do, no matter where you are, what you're doing. If that was like a common, absolute, primary focus of all of our functions, that could also be just a real game changer.
I feel like everything you just said points to the fact that we have more agency than we use. Right? And we just need to be creative about telling our own stories. You mentioned Dr. Carr, who I think is actually a public teacher, not a public school teacher, but a public teacher.
100%,
and Dr. Carr has been on this show before, and we've interviewed him in other venues and other forums. He has this this platform called Narrative. It's a place to learn, grow, and create. And Dr. Carr, for people that don't know Dr. Carr, is an exceptional, I think, example of someone who knows a lot, has read a lot, has studied for years, has a lot to say and to offer. He does it through a traditional, HBCU and schooling format, but he also does it as part of his public profile. So you don't have to go to class to get learning and teaching from Dr. Carr. He's got so many places online where he's dropping this knowledge. And even what you just said, you can spend like 5 minutes with him. I know multiple people like this. Like, Dr. Carr is one of these people. Dr. Fuller is like one of these people where they've read everything, man. Right? Like, and you just want to say to them, I wish I could take out of your brain all of that knowledge and transfer it to our people.
That's what you need, the matrix, right? Just like, lay me in the chair, just upload me. I wake up like, I'm ready,
Yeah. I'm black.
Yo, we need that. We need that. You know what I mean?
We need the Neo headset, the plug-in. But I think it's really important because, he's not 25 years old. He's got experience, he's got history, he's got lots of knowledge, and he's not just relying on the classroom to be the way that he teaches. He's teaching across multiple different platforms. He has podcasts, broadcasts. He has this site, if people want to go and see it, it's KN Narrative. It's narrative spelled with a K in front of narrative.com. And he has something there where he calls it office hours on Mondays at 8 p.m. And what you have to know about a teacher like him, a public teacher like him, first of all, he's a model of what many of us can be. Many of us walk around with so much information and knowledge about these things that we talk about, and we haven't found the way to deliver and help that, share that with other people. And we should get better at that. But if you watch him, he's kind of like you, Sharif. You got all them books behind you or whatnot. Dr. Carr has he's got your beat,
books right in front of him. Oh man, he got books in front of him. And another way he got me beat, I was just like, in one of these books, it said da da da. He could tell you which book and which page, which is a different
Yeah.
level of genius. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I'm like, hey, one of these books I read, da, 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 very broad, and but he can give you the specifics, date, time, who was there, and it's like mind blowing. But that's a level of genius. And listen, shout out to the black geniuses of the world. I'm not one of them, but I love and respect and honor those who were blessed with that. And that public teacher role, that's the blood.
Mhm.
That's the job. That is the blood of our community. And we got to recognize that.
Me talk about a different level of educating. Um,
Mm,
so I'm going to share with you guys an educator on
mhm,
TikTok.
mhm.
She has a feed called Black Home Educators. Now,
Yep.
this is a different level, right? Because we can talk about literacy and math, reading, science, the core subjects, and doing better in those things, getting better test scores. But if you were to follow this leader as a teacher, and you were to consider her, and her name is Pamela, if you were to follow Pamela and consider her to be a teacher, you would be learning a lot more than just the basics of math and
Well,
reading and
thank you.
science.
I never
Because
knew
this
her
is a
name. I just knew she's like the Wild Wild West woman. So that's Pamela. All right, thank
well,
you.
and this is why you're saying that she's the Wild West. We should tell people she's the first millionaire in her family. She did it through frugal living and saving and being smart. She believes very much in homesteading, financial freedom. You can see her topic areas here: entrepreneurship, Black history, and Black homeschooling. These are the things that together she's created, in my mind, somewhat of a public curriculum. Right. If you were to follow her, this is her curriculum. She talks a lot about financial freedom, but she can talk about it because one point of experience that she has is she saved money, she made smart decisions, she bought the right house in the right place and then sold it for enough and then moved to Montana and got 46 acres. She bought 46 acres in Montana and then built a house debt free with the money that she had, debt free house. So now her children are living on 46 acres of natural land in Montana. They wake up every day and they see, like a buffalo, and I've seen the animals on her thing. I don't know what all the animals are, but her Black kids are having an experience, right? That
Hmm.
like they would have never had. You don't wake up in kind of urban Atlanta and see, for as far as you can see, you own it and
Hmm.
natural, land and all that. And that's the life she's living. And that's what she wants to teach. So if you
Hmm.
follow her feed, you will be learning about how to teach your kids at home, how to teach them about freedom, financial freedom,
Hmm.
just freedom in general. And you will feel a lot like her, very empowered in that I don't belong to anybody. I belong to me, right?
Yeah.
That's a different level of educating.
That is. That is. I love following her. That's kind of my dream. Just like, hey, let's say, and you had Dr. Al Tatum on Freedom Friday a couple years ago, right? And that's his big thing was that if entirety of the Black community focused on land and literacy, that would be total game changers. Owning land, knowing how to use the land, not just own it like, oh yeah, I got it, like actually owning it, understanding how that can help be self-sustaining
Mhm.
for communities, and then literacy combined with that, which he's like, those are two of the most important ingredients that we can have as a community. And he spoke about that on the show, and she reminds me of his work in action.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to talk about all these things. We should,
Hmm.
we should do X, and we should uh have Black banks and blah blah blah, whatever. What we should do is educate ourselves and our people about the possibility of doing it, but also the pathway to
The
getting there,
path.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you were to follow her, I learned things just by following her.
Hmm.
And by her, if you've just joined us, we're talking about Pamela, who on TikTok is known as Black Home Educators. If you were to follow her like I do, I learned things all the time about, like, because I had questions. How did you get 48 or 46 acres? How did you buy 46 acres? Tell me more about this process. And she took you along with the process. Like, if you followed her, she started with it all just being natural, no house on it or anything. And they
Yeah.
were living in like a I want to say they were living like in an RV or something while they built their house debt free. It opened up so many questions for me about her entrepreneurship, about what you just said, land, like the importance of land and having your land, and why was she so focused on that? But someone had to teach her that, and she's the first in her family to learn all that stuff, and now she's teaching hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah,
Just by
it's
her
crazy.
thing there.
Public
And
teacher, public
would you
teacher,
say public
public
teacher?
teaching.
Yeah, yeah. And we need to consider that like a new role of some sort, right?
Hmm.
I think also, and this will be a little bit more of a controversial example,
Uh-oh, here we
but yeah,
I knew
we'll
we
see.
wouldn't escape, y'all. I knew we wouldn't
Yeah,
escape.
but I'm gonna give it anyways, begrudgingly. Some people have heard of King Randall, who is
Mm.
King Randall is a young Black man. I think at 22 years old, he decided he was going to start a schooling program for Black kids in the hood to learn practical skills and things that can help them get jobs. So he started just a program first, and then he started a school. And doing this as a young man at like everybody watching this right now, think about what you were doing at 22 years old, and I'm pretty sure it probably wasn't starting a school. And in his school, it's called the Life Preparatory School for Boys. In his school, the young people learn hands-on skills, things like how to change your oil, things about like how to do for self, how to build things, how to be a carpenter, not just from a vocational standpoint, but from a life skills standpoint, like learn how to have agency and to be, as Charles Cole would say to us, be agentic. So he started a school, he started a charitable organization. He's gotten a lot of attention by it. Now, the begrudging part, okay, if I'm being very honest or whatnot, we're not going to always agree with our public teachers of any group, right?
Yep.
Like, some people don't agree with us about charter schools being important for us. So that's fine. We just don't agree with that. King Randall went in some other direction, which, I won't spend a lot of time talking about, but he's the darling of the conservatives now. They see him because, he says things like, I don't think it's important to teach young people about voting. We need to teach them how to like change oil or whatnot. So he's very much on some Booker T. Washington, early Booker T. Washington stuff. And because of that, he's a darling of the right wing. And now he's going even further and further and further in that, of saying basically he's creating like a pro-Black way of saying that the things that Black people care about aren't important, like politics and voting and fixing structural racism. He's getting to the point where it's like there's no such thing as structural racism. It's just us. But that's an aside, right? Because public teachers also give us the ability to trade ideas with each other, and we don't always have to agree as long as we're educating, right? As long as we're putting these things out into the public. So that's what I was saying when I said this might be a little bit,
Totally. Yeah. No.
Spicy. Not everybody who's coming to educate us or be public educators is well, I don't know how to put it, 100% for us. But even then, I still think the boys going through his school who are learning those skills that he's teaching, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good.
Yeah. And that's what you do. You take the good and you leave the rest. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to take the meat off the bone and throw the bone back. Like, hey, I have no need for this part of the message, but actually teaching, youth skills that, they're not going to learn in traditional school. Unless they're there unless the very small group that's in a, automotive, voc ed kind of thing. But like, isn't that something that we'd want, more of them to know, and it goes from whether it's whether it's finances, whether it's communication, whether it's conflict resolution. Think of all the skills that we acquire sometimes very late in life. They would say, you know what, if I knew this when I was a teenager, if I knew this in my 20s, if I knew this I'm at the point where I'm like, if I knew this in my 40s, I could have made some course corrections, now that I'm in my 50s, right? Like, and so how do we just not just say like, oh, I wish somebody had given me the game on this. How do we make sure that there's like, we may not have been at fault for that, but if the next generation doesn't know it, that is our fault.
I don't want to be responsible for other people's children. Don't give me that responsibility. That's what a lot
No,
of
with
people are
great
saying.
powers. Well, you know what Spidey says, great power. Well, I'm sure they stole that from somewhere, but great power, great responsibility, and you're powerful. So what's the responsibility? And in Islam, there's a saying that says, everything has a tax on it, and a tax on
Mm,
knowledge is to share it.
mm,
Like, and if
mm,
we just understand it, like you can't be a hoarder of information and knowledge, right? Like, look, I had a friend, I had a friend when we were in college. This joker, there was an assignment in class, and you had to go to the library to get it. And this is where it goes: cooperation versus competitiveness. This joker hid the material that people needed for the course. He went to the library first, right after class, and it was only in a couple space. Right back then, there wasn't a ton of computers in that space. It was like you have to go, you have to find the book, you have to copy it, and then put it back. This joker hid it, so he could look better when the assignment was due than everybody else in the class. And I of course I ridiculed him and just told him how terrible of a character that flaw that exposed. But now realize that happens all the time. That is exactly what happens.
mhm, mhm.
And I was just like, huh. Like he was actually doing what he learned as, we're 18, 19, but it's just like that sums up life, and we got to change that.
I think when I hear that, it makes me careful about everything that we're talking about in this show. We're talking as if we're all going to do it. Like, all
Mhm,
black people should jump out there and be this positive or whatnot. It doesn't take into account the fact that many of our people have never been with us. And many of
mhm,
our people will double cross us. Many of our people have no interest in the collective. They have only interest in self. We have lots of, people that are joining the other team
mhm.
to say that black people are wrong about everything and that we're ignorant and that it's our culture that created that historic gap that I talked about. That
and
that
and
gap.
all their audiences look the same. It's always interesting that
Yeah,
that conversation is always with some other people. I'm just like, why is that
and
always the audience?
they are public miseducators,
Mhm,
right? Public misdirectors, misinformants, and so I'm only saying this just to say it doesn't take everybody, right?
mhm.
We have
Oh,
never had everybody. But for the people that feel some responsibility to the collective, the responsibility should include communal teaching.
mhm,
That is how we acquired literacy in the United States post-slavery, was through communal teaching. Intergenerational, all ages, not just kids, not just K through 12, but
mhm,
adults, children, grandparents, guardians, babies, all in the same schools. Folk schools, I'll call them, because they were not formal schools, but they were there was a folk way of acquiring literacy and information. Listen, we we have these examples in history of people listening to the master of the house who's saying some news or saying some things, and there's this informal pipeline of how that information gets out into the field, and people know what's coming. Someone can
mhm.
read. Did you read the newspaper? If you can read the newspaper and give the information to your other people. That's an old example of the genesis of an idea that should still be taking place today. And I think we have people that exemplify that, like Dr. Carr and others, where they're not their knowledge and their degrees isn't for self.
Mhm,
It's for the collective.
mhm.
But they feel some responsibility. They feel enough responsibility to teach,
Yeah.
right? And you have people like me in the world who say, I'm not a teacher. I don't have any teaching credentials or whatnot. I don't. Um, I have, I learned some things that actually set me free in some ways that are important. And I have a responsibility to share those things, if nothing else. Even with the humility of knowing that I'm not like a classroom teacher.
You're a
Uh,
public teacher.
yeah, public teacher, and it doesn't, and I'm on the hook. I'm not doing it because I'm an altruistic person, just by nature or whatnot. I feel blessed. I feel like God gave me some things at times where doors were shut for me, and with each one of those doors that opened, it was my job to tell other people like, "This is where the open door is," right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm, mhm.
like that. What you said earlier just hit me. kind of like the tax on knowing is sharing, you know. That I think perfectly sums up why I do any of this that we're talking
Yeah.
about today, is not because it's just out of the goodness of my heart, I'm some great person. It's just because when you go through a door, it's kind of your job to tell the other people how to get through that door. Right. And even, things like, and, I don't want to be long-winded about this, but there's so much teaching that we need to do, and learning and information sharing. And one example that I'll give is the number of people, Black folks and brown folks and people of color and women and others, who are coming into formerly patriarchal nonprofit systems. And there are all these things of like, how do you write a concept paper? How do you do a budget? What should your first 90 days look like when you become a nonprofit executive? What do you do about kind of like mutiny on your staff? How do you keep your vision? And these are all things I could keep going. Each of these things could be a module of teaching and learning, because I know we call each other oftentimes like, listen, this is what they're asking me for X, to be able to get this particular grant. How do I do it? That's a form of teaching that like builds us all up. So it takes all kinds to have a revolution. I feel like I talked long on that.
No, I mean, but they're all like really important points. And, going back to the article that you introduced us to, on the 19th, one of the things that struck out to me was, they're mentioning of these historical figures, and one of the folks was Mary Church Terrell. So Mary Church Terrell is this, we call her Black Educator Hall of Famer. That's, this series that we put out in partnership with Ed Post about, here are Black Educator Hall of Famers that people should know about, and here's how they traverse the land. Here's how they thought. But one of her sayings to Black community and folks with knowledge and information, she said, lift as you climb. That's the role and responsibility, to lift as you climb. And when you think about that, that's exactly what you're talking about. Like, it doesn't mean that we have everything figured out. It means that we're still climbing, we're still learning, but we also are not neglectful of those who should be coming up those same pathways, those doors, and helping them climb as well. And so that, I think that's just a critical piece when you think about Rosa Parks learning from a traditional teacher, but learning in a unconventional place, right? So Rosa Parks, before the Montgomery bus boycott, she actually was learning from Septima Clark, along with many others. She attended Septima Clark's workshops. What was it? The Highland Project or the Highland Institute, right? Like, and so Rosa Parks going to Septima Clark, who had been fired as from a teacher, in South Carolina. Dr. King, like, hey, you know what? You're a brilliant teacher. Can you come teach us how to organize and use some of the same, just your skill to lesson plan and break down complex issues and then disseminate it in this platform, in this space, for these objectives. And so she did. Rosa Parks ended up being one of the participants in her workshops. Or like Ida B. Wells, right? Like, she became this first she was a classroom teacher in Tennessee, ends up getting fired because of her activism. And then she turns to journalism and say, oh, you fired me from my classroom with those, 30 kids. Now I'm going to teach the world I'm going to shine light everywhere where there's this darkness of whiteness and white supremacy. And she became this public teacher, right? Like, all of them. It doesn't mean that she solved everything and now she's sitting high on the horses. Like, no, I'm gonna expose what people need to know about what's happening, about how to organize, about where the spaces, where the allies are, where's the resources, where's the connections, and where are the wins. And so, that article just brought me back to that, like, there's breadcrumbs, all over the place. There's that we just got to like recognize it and then make sure that we're not just seeing them for ourselves, but we're like, okay, here it is. And we're giving the game to other folks as we learn it, and they're going to give us game, right? Like the youth showed me how to, how to do IG and what to put on there and all of that. So that intergenerational, and it's not a one-way street. If we make it fluid,
Mm-hmm.
then that's the power of it.
It's so important about that last point. I thought about that earlier. Teaching isn't one direction. It's not like, gather around, kids. I'm the old
Yeah,
guy who knows everything.
yeah.
If you are not being mentored by people younger than yourself, and if you're not learning from people younger than yourself, you're doing it wrong. Right. So like this whole thing about communal learning, when I said earlier that the early Black schools and the early kind of Black learning systems were intergenerational, right? Everybody needed to learn how to read at the same time. Excuse me. So there was this collective understanding of we all have to teach and we all have to learn, right? There's a responsibility to teaching. There's also a responsibility to being a lifelong learner, right? For the good of our community, you should be learning. My uncle said this to me. I keep saying this over years. I'll never forget this. Very simple piece of advice. He said, I'm not saying you have to be the smartest person in the world, but boy, just don't be dumb. Right. and I've never forgotten that. Like, you don't have to be trying to hit genius level. Just don't be stupid. Learn all you can. Right. And then share all you can. So we've talked this entire show about the importance of public teaching and the importance of sharing what you know or whatnot. There's also an importance of you can't share what you don't know. So there's a responsibility to be a learner also. Right.
Sometimes you got to be quiet.
You just need to think it through. Like, should I say this? No, I shouldn't. I should just
zip it. I need to learn more. Just zip it.
As we land this plane on public teaching and unconventional Black education and unconventional Black teaching and just teaching in general. First of all, I want to open it up and just say it's not just about unconventional Black teaching. I think all teachers and educators should see themselves in some sense as radical warriors against ignorance, and ignorance is killing us. So it's not just the thing where we need to just talk to one group or one race of teachers to do their job of kind of liberating the masses from the ignorance that will kill us all. And I think there are many different vehicles. If there's any point that we hit on the most on this show today, is that there are many different ways to teach and to share your information and share your knowledge. There was a time where I didn't think like I had much to give. If you would have asked me, I would have said, I would have been pretty down on myself and not considered myself one of the educated people in society. And I always looked up to people that like had done well in school and had done well in college and came out with degrees and whatever. Never saw myself amongst them, and I never thought like that, or put myself in the same league or counsel with them. For years I didn't. And at some point, becoming a blogger and becoming a writer, where I had the freedom just to write or blog whatever I want and share information. And that made me a researcher, and that made me somebody who had to pull together a story and storytelling, which made me a student because I had to go learn things to be able to write about them. I saw it as my teaching is learning. My teaching is being a student. Like I was learning all these things. I was demystifying concepts and reading a lot and then just sharing it. So I was a learner teacher. Like I was learning and I was sharing what I was learning to others. And that evolved into into me doing more things. Like you mentioned the Educator Hall of Fame that that we did as a joint project, and we did many of these type of profiles. But Citizen Ed started at like 1 a.m. one night, where I was just saying I need a bigger blog to be able to put out all the stuff that I want to learn and I want to tell people about. So I started blogging in 1999. I tell people all the time I was an OB, original blogger, because I was blogging before there were these platforms that made it easy. I was blogging in HTML, and I had a day job, a normal job. I would go to work every day, hated my job. I'd come home at night and just write. Like I'd do my stuff with Josh, my oldest son, and then I would just write.
It was like that meme with Kermit the Frog. He's like,
yeah. There's all this stuff I wanted to say and I wanted to talk about with the expectation that no one was ever going to read it. Like that was my whole expectation. So I wasn't doing it because I wanted any type of notoriety or anything from it, because I was anonymous. There was no expecting that anybody was going to care about what I was writing. But that evolved into this platform, Citizen Ed, which was my way of saying I could be a citizen journalist. I could be a public teacher. I can have my own platform. I bought the domain name. I bought the platform. I started doing it on my own. And then, luckily I met other people that really appreciated it. But that became my vehicle for having something to say or to share or to teach. And I'm only sharing the story to be able to say to everybody, whatever level you think that you're at, you have value in being able to teach other people what you know. And if you think that you don't, I want to encourage you to get over that part, because I felt that way myself, like you do, at one point in my life. And it was very liberating to start seeing that people thought I had something of value to share, even when I didn't think that I had it. So that's my final word. Sharif, what's your final word on unconventional teaching?
Yeah, I would say, I just want to highlight what you express, and I give you a lot of flack, um, because, well, one, that's my role. But then two is, I think, sometimes you don't even realize like just the impact, so like I still don't consider myself a writer, but did start blogging, because I learned from you as the OB. And even the platform Philly Seventh Ward was started from you and your team helping create that. I've never created a web. I still have no idea how to create a website or anything like that. But like that was when I actually started writing. Was your influence on that and your encouragement and support. So I would say just big shout out. And there's like so many folks that you won't even hear from that have learned from you as a public teacher, a public figure who is teaching and continuing to learn. So I just think that it's so important for communities to have, folks like you who are not just learning, but they're disseminating, they're shining the light on the breadcrumbs that are there while figuring out, okay, where are the new ones, and continuing to evolve and innovate and and march forward. So that's one. The other piece is just these I love this intergenerational approach. I think that's the natural holistic way that we should be in. And often we're told like, no, elders, you're over here, teenagers, you're over there, this group is over here. Like it's constant, not only these oppressive group dynamics that we buy into, but then there's also the individuality piece that's also a part of that. Is like they don't want us to look at as ourselves as communal, and so we shouldn't think of divide and conquer as just one kind of militaristic way or just based off of race or things that happen. We get generational messages that they don't understand you and you don't understand them and they're useless and that group is useless, just talking about age differences within our own communities. And I think that's really important. And two folks I think about, like just teaching, just how they said it. Sometimes it's the same message, but it's how people say it. So when I think about Marley Diaz, who was an elementary school kid who said, you know what, I was tired. She started collecting books for Black children, diverse
Hmm.
book from
Hmm.
diverse authors. And when they asked her, like, why'd you do that? You're in the sixth grade, like, and she's amassing thousands of books to distribute in schools that had classroom libraries, school libraries with no diverse authors. And she said, I was tired of reading about white boys and their dogs.
Ooh, damn.
Like, yeah, that's simple. Like, she was just like, she was, and just imagine she's in the sixth grade and how often that was what she was learning.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm
Um,
frozen. I
Oh,
feel
I
like
thought it
I'm
was
frozen.
me again. I was like, I might be talking to myself, at least I can hear
Uh,
you. And then
uh,
as far as like Black teachers, Jarvis Givens, Dr. Jarvis Givens, who is also on the show, talks about that Black teachers were a distinct group of political actors. He's talking about in the 1900s. And I would say, like, you know what, that is now as well, that you are a distinct group of political actors in the wave of anti-truth crusades. You and other folks who are, interested in teaching truth and educational justice, which means truth is also being a part of that, racial justice, social justice. You're also a distinct group of actors in this space. leaders amongst leaders, embrace the role, do it in community with others, and do it with the absolute belief that in the righteousness of this work.
Well, I feel like I'm still like, on black screen. COINTELPRO
COINTELPRO, boy,
COINTELPRO.
they don't play. They on their game. We got to be on ours. They always on their game.
They refuse to let me be great. But for our friends and family watching this show this week, we really appreciate you all. We know that we've been in the last couple of weeks, we've been on the road. So that means that our show has been inconsistent, which is hard for you guys to keep up with, but we will do a better job. I specifically will do a better job of making sure that you know what shows are coming up. We have some guests that are going to be on Freedom Friday with us coming up. So please stay tuned for that. Share the show if you liked it, and send us any information about shows that you would like us to do. Anything that you think would be interesting for us to cover. As always, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer after this hour with Sharif El-Mekki and me. Have a great day. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next